Hello, everybody. Um, dear guests, dear students, I'll be your host for next two sessions. My name is Balsa Gobovic, and I'm professor of photography here at Faculty of Visual Arts. Today, we will have a chance to hear a couple of guests. First of all, under cultural memory, values we must forget, and cultural democracy, different representatives in cultivating tolerance and appreciating diversity. So in first session, we will hear Haykuhi Muradyan from Yerevan State University, Sinisa Stefanovic from Institute for Studies in Cultural Development, and Francesco Spera, University of Salento, Italy. So for the beginning, the first one is Miss Haykuhi.
Thank you.
Muradyan, thank you. And I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name.
That's okay.
She will introduce her presentation and work under the title Cultural Policy of Armenia After the Velvet Revolution, Velvet for or Against Culture, Institutional Transformation of Culture Policy in Post-Revolutionary Armenia. A little bit about Professor Muradyan.
Yes.
Can
I share my screen or?
Yes, you will be able to share your screen. Natasha, she'll be able to share her screen, right? She's a student of historical sciences. Her research interests focus on cultural anthropology, applied anthropology, anthropology of politics, and heritage management. She's a lecturer at the Department of Cultural Studies at Yerevan State University. She teaches courses on introduction of cultural studies, cultural policy, and Armenian culture of modern period. She also teaches a course on theories of cultural genocide and at the Department of Genocide Studies at the Institute of Armenian Studies at the same university. So, Professor, you have your podium.
Yeah, thank you very much. At first, I'm very sorry I cannot switch on my camera. I don't know, it's maybe some technical problem now. I want to solve it. But I would love to now share my screen if it's possible.
If you go with share screen on the bottom of yours.
Yeah. Okay. Do you see?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me. Oh, okay. At first, let me to thank Natasha and all organizers for this fascinating conference, very interesting and very productive. And the conference is very important opportunity to get acquainted with another professors and researchers from all over the world. So today I will do a presentation about the Velvet Revolution of Armenia. I will not talk about the Velvet Revolution itself, but I will try to see to introduce you my research on how this revolution affected to the cultural policy system of Armenia and what kind of changes do we see now. So my research questions, I started this research just after the Velvet Revolution. It happened in Armenia in 2011, and it's sometimes like when the after the revolution, the authority changed, the system of government and the system of, especially of culture policy changed. And I wanted to know at first how the state and public perceptions of culture changed. I mean, we know how, I will introduce very shortly how it was before and how it changed after the revolution. And what is important that I would like to concentrate mostly about about the role of political leader, because in the countries where the social institutions do not have, are not organized and do not have somehow a history of activity and a history of being founded in the society, sometimes the political leader has the most important role how to influence on the development of culture, and not only culture, generally in different spheres as well, but mostly on different on the sphere of culture. We will see how the political leader reflected his perception of culture and organizes the whole culture policy system on based on these perceptions. We will see how the perceptions of political leader. By the way, if we have also students, it's very important to take into account Weber's work about the political leader and the power, and he speaks about this, how actually the power and leaders, how they want to keep their you know, power and authority, and what are the main tools of this, and how it is connected with the culture. So we'll see how the structure and principles, the tools of culture policy changes, and what kind of new approaches brought us the revolution. I would say that mostly how I did my research. I conducted interviews. I am on my background anthropologist, so my main methodology is observation and interviews, in-depth interviews with the stakeholders. In this research topic, I had interviews with the Ministry of Culture, workers and employees of the Ministry of Culture, and also with the culture organizations like the head of the directors of the museums. I also tried to see the main tendencies, how the legislation changes and how the structure of the culture management changes after the Velvet Revolutions. So at first, I mean, maybe most of you know, I just wanted to underline that I took two different approaches of cultural policy. What is cultural policy? Firstly, was elaborated by UNESCO in Monaco in 1967, and it was considered as a system of administrative and financial actions carried out by the state, which aimed at the preservation and development of culture. But I also would like to emphasize another perception of culture when cultural policy is considered as the community life, the organization, the cultural life of the community life, and where not only the state has the most important role in formation of the cultural life of the society, but also community. And it is very important to take into consideration the community's perception of culture. What is culture? Sometimes when you compare the two different approaches, how state considers what is culture and promotes to the development of this culture, and how the community, rural life, people, they think what is culture for them and what they want to develop. Sometimes these two approaches are different, and sometimes even they are contradictory. So this is important to understand how you can actually how can you organize the cultural policy system based on these two approaches. So in this sense, it is important to know that the after Velvet Revolution, which happened in Armenia in 2018, and it was like an euphoria. People were very happy because at last they get rid of the power which were not good for the society development, which was corrupted, which was already very, you know, not acceptable by the most of the population, and at last the people come together and they did revolution. And after the revolution, we see that at last to the power came the person who most of the people, citizens of Armenia, they accept him and his team as a power. And we see that actually these political leaders started to continue the previous model. I mean, he started as we didn't have social institutes which work like by themselves, and they were connected with this political leader previously as well. Now we see that actually the same is happening. So the prime minister, after the Velvet Revolution, one of his speeches, he said his opinion about what is culture. He said, culture is a means and platform for increasing the quality of relations between any two citizens. It is our political position that culture is an integral part of the public education, and the importance of culture is to continuously raise the intellectual level of public. So he says his own opinion about what is culture. And he gives somehow direction to where should go your state cultural policy. And we see that he saw this culture and education as a connected sphere, as culture a mean of education, and people should be culturally educated. Sometimes when I go in deep to the research of these interviews, sometimes it is very have similarities what was happening in 1960s during Khrushchev period of thaw. If we have historians in our auditorium, they will also see some connections. When the Khrushchev time, they speak about the freedom of culture and cultural education, and how each people in Armenia should have this access to culture. And for example, the next part of the interview is culture is primarily an educational factor for us, and the program and policy of our government will be aimed at connecting culture and people with each other, changing interpersonal, economic, and political relations in Armenia through the use of culture, raising relations to a new level. So again, we see like culture is perceived as something which is very connected to education, and culture is a method when you want to create like civilized society, democratic society, and for this new civil and democratic society, you need to use the culture as a tool. Another part of interview as well, where they speak about like how each citizen of Armenia should have like very specific connection with the culture, and every month, for example, each citizen of Armenia should go at least one time to theater, one time to cinema or something. And this method is also for me very linked to the Soviet period time model, where you also need these free tickets to theater or some interesting exhibitions. So here we see that after the Velvet Revolution, again, culture is perceived as something which you need to create this civil society or democratic society, and that's why you need even to press your society to go to theater, to encourage your society, sorry, not press, mostly to encourage or something. So that's why they started new cultural projects, educational cultural projects, like for example, your art at school. So they started to invite artists, painters, singers, opera dancers to the schools to have open lectures. It was also like this classic class in Armenian Dasaran plus Dasakan, where you every once in a semester at school you have tickets, free tickets to go to opera house or to the ballet or some which is like government thinks that this is very important, and that's why he started this project. There were also some projects about cultural development of the community. One is very interesting for me as an historian and anthropologist. It was the reconstruction of houses of culture. It's very interesting because actually these houses of culture, they were Soviet projects, typical Soviet constructions for developing the cultural Soviet culture of the villages of and not only in Armenia but all Soviet countries. They have these houses of culture, and for me it was like my question, the most interesting question for me is why you want to reconstruct these typical Soviet typical constructions of houses of culture. What you need, because we know that actually these houses of culture, they were also for propaganda of Soviet ideology. So we don't have this Soviet ideology, we don't have any political ideology to be propagated. So why we want to reconstruct these typical institutions? And actually they from state budget, they use a lot of money on this project, but as a result I can say that there was no conceptualization of these houses of culture. They were not recycled as a new cultural institutions, and we don't for me, if you go to the villages and they will say, oh, our clubs, they used to say like clubs, our houses of culture, our clubs, they were different from Soviet times. We used to go and watch movies there, we used to gather there, but now everyone in a village, they have internet, they have their televisions, they don't need and these activities to recycled again, they don't have this need. So reconstruction of houses of culture for me is very questionable, but anyway, it was one of the projects that was carried out after the Velvet Revolution. And after Velvet Revolution, it was also a very, the cultural policy of Armenia went into crisis because of war with Azerbaijan, with Nagorno-Karabakh case. And we know that, especially in the border settlements, we saw a very, very critical situation. And in this case, it's also very interesting that now culture gains another function. For Prime Minister, one of his speeches, he said the post-war cultural policy should be aimed at restoring the psychology of the public and overcoming the consequences of the crisis. So this is interesting, like how the leader, how his perception of culture now is directed to another field. Like now culture becomes not only connected with education, but also have some relaxing or in critical situation, like for people, something psychologically needed or something. It is his own perception, but his own perception becomes a state policy. And for example, creative unions of Armenia, they started to go to border settlements to have concerts there or something. So it's interesting that these are not only words and perceptions, but they became policy. For example, how it reflected to the structure of the cultural policy. According to the law of Armenia, in 2019, it was accepted that the Ministry of Culture, it became the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture, and Sport. So they combined all these. So when it was said before that education connected with culture, and they decided the Ministry of Culture should be linked and should be joined to Ministry of Education, and now we have the Ministry of Education and Education and Culture, Sport Organization conducted. So, and also as I need to be in time. Yeah, I have 5 minutes, or I would love to. 5 minutes? Okay, so just skip several points here. So on modes of cultural policy, now when we have before the Velvet Revolution, mostly the preservation of the heritage, now we have a lot of very new mode, the creation of culture, and also the animation, which is very important mode of cultural policy. And now we see that we have this mode as a main policy of culture as well. And to conclude, we see that after the revolution and we can speak now about the cultural policy in crisis. Actually, the whole system of policy is in crisis because first, after war situation in the border settlements, the second, because of the political leader himself decides how to actually modelize the culture policy system. And we have this centralized cultural policy before Velvet Revolution and the recentralization processes. So we don't have the decentralization, which I thought that maybe at the result of my research, I will conclude about the decentralization. But now I think that this is the term recentralization that now we can speak. And also this monological cultural policy vs discursive cultural policy model. I had to conclude that because actually because of this decentralization didn't took place, we mostly can speak about the monological cultural policy. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And once again, I'm very sorry that I cannot switch on my camera because of technical issues, but I would be very happy to answer the questions if there are.
Thank you, Professor. I just want to remind you that the policy is to have questions after all presenters went. So please stay with us, and I hope that there will be questions for you at the end of the session.
Thank you.
So thank you. So our next presenter is Sinisa Stefanovic from the Institute for Studies in Cultural Development from Belgrade, Serbia. He presents himself just as a historian. But further down, we can see that it's kind of rich work from his part. So there are many titles that you can mention here, but I'll just mention a couple. O javnoj upotrebi jezika I pisma, ćirilica u Ustavu Srbije, pregled značajne izvorne građe I uspod I pad Vukove ćirilice od Krimskog rata do Krimskog rata. So, Professor Stefanovic, the floor is yours. So, please turn on your microphone.
First of all, hello. First of all, I'm not a professor. Thank you very much, but I'm not.
I'm sorry.
I'm just a researcher. So anyway, I'm very glad that we have such an interesting group consisting of people from Serbia, Italy, and Armenia. Armenia is for a historian of particular interest these days. So I'd like to say that and start with this abstract that I've given for the conference that you probably saw. And I use some very harsh words, finalizing with the idea of a culture set. So I'd like to talk about the process of, not effect of, but process of introduction and life of digraphia in Serbia. Digraphia means use of standard Serbian Cyrillic and a standard Croatian Latin for Serbian language. And I've put that process into the context of great powers and the great powers competition. Because, to my opinion, it is part of it. And a colleague from Armenia might understand very well that the key issue in that regard is the fact that from 1774 up to 1856, Russia, Imperial Russia, was officially and recognized protector of the rights of the Christians into the Ottoman Empire. Then it is very important to notice that this is peace of Kuchuk-Kainarji, one of the most important peace agreements ever made in modern European history. One of these breaking moments in the history of Europe. So the very idea, what I'm talking about is that we have to take into consideration a process of, and I'll come to terminology now, of change, of understanding of the value and function of Cyrillic writing for Serbia and for Serbian nation. So now I'm coming with the three terms which are most of you familiar. That is a historical memory, that is a cultural memory, that is a cultural identity. And I'll give another one, which is usually not present in the discussions of present day. It is a cultural sovereignty. Sounds strange in these days of integrations and things, but there is a way, an ideological framework and international politics frameworks called Austroslavism, and there is which is after that was developed as Yugoslavism. That's the idea of the integration of South Slavs, first under the rule of Habsburg Empire, after that as common people or familiar people at least in Yugoslavia's independent state. Well, why is it important? It is important because this first part of Austroslavism comes in a time when Austria and Russia were fighting all along the area for dominance and for the territories, of course, from the Baltic Sea. Let's say these three today, we can watch it also today, from Baltics to the Black Sea. So we have this case also now. Europe is again somehow very close to such a division. On the other hand, we have this idea of Austroslavism, which never took, in fact, never got a deep root with the Serbs. It got with the Croats, but not with the Serbs. So what happened? It happened that by introduction of reforms of writing of Vuk Karadžić back in the first half of the 18th century, and finally accepting his reform as the official or semi-official in Serbia. In that period, we got this construction of common language and common grammar at this 19th century between Croats and Serbs. The both ideas are coming from Austria. We have a big cultural fight in Serbia during the first half of the 19th century between those who wanted this old way of writing, a Slavic way of writing, common to Bulgarians, Russians, everybody else, and the other one who wanted this system of writing which is closer, reformed, closer to the, or in fact, completely close to Croatian way of writing. So that was a huge political fight, in fact, because we can take the we can just take a look at the moments and ways these reforms came into Serbia. This Vuk Karadžić reform and phonetics orthography. They came at a very specific time after the dissolution of the government of constitution defenders, so-called Ustavobranitelji, and reconstruction of dynasty of Obrenović. That happens just after 1856. Why? Because up to 1856, Russia was a protector of Christians in Ottoman Empire. After that, the concert of European powers were protectors, and that literally means Austro-Hungary. So, problem that I'd like to discuss here is that is a perception that was built up in Serbia after the introduction of book reforms, which was unconstitutional, which was simply presented to Serbs by annulation of all the laws that were considering and constitutional ideas, considering the official writing in Serbia. Literally, Serbia was left without official law on languages since 1868 up to 1991. And that is a period of Yugoslavia, first and second Yugoslavia, when this construction of common language, Serbo-Croatian, came into being as official or semi-official. We can discuss it if you want. And how was that made in Serbia? In Serbia, it was by alteration of historical memory and a deliberate alternation of historical memory. So the ways and means and reasons for the introduction of books reform were simply, by later science, simply they were kind of misrepresented or not discussed or simply pushed under the rug. And that became a new narrative, deliberately, politically created narrative, which became part of a cultural memory. And after that, it became today, it is a cultural identity. So the problem is today that Serbs who are supporting mono standard of writing, Cyrillic standard of writing, they say that the book reforms is a part of a national identity. Why is that important? It is important because it is not. Because there is a Serbian Cyrillic existing from 13th century. In fact, there are strong indications when the Serbia got this independent state and independent church that was connected with the work of Saint Sava, something for Serbs, he's something like Saint Istvan for Magyars or Saint Václav for Czechs. That we made discontinuity in that regard, and now this new narrative becomes like a national narrative. Problem is that it is not a good point to start with, because these reforms are completely the same as used in Croatia. So, but with the Latin letters. So we have this interchange between, and that was the idea of Vuk Karadžić, by the way, which makes like a couple of troubles today in Serbian society and Serbian culture. Because we are in a center of the ideological or continuity of ideological Kulturkrieg, not a Kulturkampf, it's a Kulturkrieg going on here, in which we have this ideas. It turns out like that. I won't show you now too much of the statistics, but I'll try just to show you, try to share the screen like this. Wait, here it is. Okay. So this is the statistics of the use of the Serbian Cyrillic. Now you can see here, this great fall is in 1914, when it was forbidden by law. Also in Croatia and Bosnia, or in fact in Austria-Hungary. And after that, you can see this fall, which is going in Yugoslavia, then rise again. That was during the World War II. And after World War II, we see now deliberate cultural policy of Communist Party. And what we have also is, just a second, I'm just trying to, no, I can't because of that, I can't make the other tab. Probably I'll try this way. Can I move it now? Yes, I can move it now. And today we have this idea. We have this, that is today. No, this is not that, excuse me, this is not that one. But the point is that in this creation of present situation, some things were simply forgotten. And education and our cultural consciousness is not raising up enough for this, for example, for this statistics that we got into the polling, internet polling. So we asked the question, and that question was posed for the people who were mostly highly educated. And the question was, do you know, has any time in history in Serbia, any letter, any writing system was forbidden? Now we got crazy results. Only 25% people of people knew that was, yes, that was Cyrillic by the occupation in 1916 to 1918. 46% said they don't know. It simply doesn't know. And that was in a years of remembrance of the World War I. So I think I have the quite a argument to present that this is a part of consequence of deliberate policies, cultural policies in a long term. And we have another interesting thing that we have today, and this is very interesting. This is what we have now in the understanding of that culture Krieg or culture Kampf or whatever you like to call it, between people who are supporting idea of coming back to the one standard, Cyrillic standard, Vuk Cyrillic standard, Serbian Cyrillic today, and those who are supporting both systems to be used. Now, in debate, we have all these things that I'm writing down. They have not came into being yesterday or since 1991 or since 2000 after this revolution. They were developing from the time of Vuk Karadžić, or from the time of the science of the time, which made this narrative working. So now we have this ideological also divide. And we are talking about this very interesting phenomenon that in all these narratives created, we didn't have just one thing which is very important, that idea of the reforms, very basics of the reforms of Vuk Stefanovic Karadžić, are the ideas of Herder and Adelung of a German Enlightenment movement, which were in fact applied on the Slavic letters. So this is a unique system, historically unique system. This is something that is different from all the other Slavic systems of writing, and particularly in Slavic histories. So today we have a situation that European Union supports this digraphy system in Serbia and understands that it is like a normal approach for Serbs and Serbia, and that people who are supporting digraphia, they are liberal and everything else, and those who do not, they are conservative, this and that, without any kind of gray zone between. And that makes a huge problem. And the problem is that no one wants to understand the very idea of this system of Cyrillic writing, and that is the that is a plant. It is a plant that was made of the German ideas of enlightenment, of Central European culture, and Slavic culture. Common. There is nothing like that, and that obvious in present day European cultural landscape. I don't see that. So, to my opinion, and that is why I'm using that idea of the culture side. Let me conclude with that. Is that maybe it's word too strong, but with the disappearance, and we see disappearance of Cyrillics, we are losing a very specific sign of a very specific culture, and I think that is very bad for the European, at least, cultural landscape. And that's it. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Stefanovic. Now we are going to the third presenter, who is second time with us, and that's Francesco Spera from University Salento. I'm sorry. Mr. Spera is a PhD candidate in European and international law at the University of Salento, Italy. His experience covers the field of EU institutional law, EU constitutional law, EU environmental law, and EU external relation law. He worked for several EU and Italian public institutions, to mention few: Italian Chamber of Commerce in EU, Italian Ministry of Development, EU Parliament, and others. And he is part of various EU-funded projects and European and international think tanks of European matters. His presentation is titled "A Common EU Memory in the Western Balkans." Mr. Spera, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think you say Hvala for the invitation again. I'm very honored and grateful to be part of this so important conference. Thank you, Natasha, and the other colleagues. I like that we keep this cooperation on the other side of the Adriatic and the Balkans, and well, being from Salento and from Puglia, we definitely are these Eastern Italians looking forward to our dear friends Balkan. And so thank you for this. Thank you for the previous presentation. Actually, I think we can make a link in a more general aspect of European memory law and memory policy. I will share my screen now, and I will introduce the team from, of course, as you may have seen from the presentation myself, that I'm kind of maybe too much into European matters. So what I'm going to introduce today to this session is actually linked to the fact that there is, of course, an attempt from the European Union starting from the 90s to harmonize and create a sort of European memory policy that embodies all the national memory policy in this new field of studies that has characterized the European doctrine and European literature. And in this aspect, so I will talk about what is the European memory policy, and talking about where it started, of course, from the West, and then with the Big Bang enlargement, 2004, with the Eastern European countries, post-socialist countries, plus which kind of legal instrument European Union is using for reinforcing these memories, and then the case will be not on this side, and you will see how the European Union memory policies has influenced the Western Balkans. For this, I argue that there is enough literature that and really recent books that explains in the Western Balkans the influence of European memory policy. But I took a small, quite well-known example on the other end. So vice versa. So how the European Union is applying the framework of the Holocaust, of his memory policy to a case that belongs mostly to the memory policy in the Western Balkans, and trying to Europeanize. Of course, in light of the fact that we will create the same European memory policy, that this country at some point will join the EU, and to legitimize the image of the EU through these cultural aspects. So what the research question for the literature I can provide, of the literature you need. I didn't want to fill too much the slides, but what is the research question is that, yes, on one side you have a lot of research that describe how the Western Balkans, in light of their accession process, and they have adopted to a certain extent to a lot of fields European standards. So mine is on the other way around. So how, to what extent European memory policy incorporates Western Balkan memory events and make them European. Yeah, and that's the argument. And well, just briefly, what we are talking about here is that what is a traumatic past and post-memory totalitarian communism. So how probably some of you already knows that in order to legitimize a nation, we need to, or the force, the government, and the cultural elite or not, or the cultural civil sphere of a nation mobilizes history, picking some important events from the past and choose selectively to commemorate a certain memory, probably even close memory, that creates both of the elements, this group cohesion, and that the group cohesion will be part of legitimizing a united nation. So this traumatic past and post memory applies mostly to nations and to single member states. What is new, of course, and even if it's 30 years of research, it's quite new for international and regional organizations such as the EU, that this framework, a legitimation of the EU through memory, is an attempt, or one of the attempts of the European Union to legitimize itself, including then a lot of memories that started, of course, from the fact that European Union legitimized its creation and this European pan-European identity by the, let's say, narrative of breaking the pattern of millennial conflicts among Europeans. So on the other hand, it breaks these theories on picking the memory and picking the history as a continuation of the past, because on what the novelty here is that the European Union is a breaking point for Europeans. Is a moment where the millennial conflicts, atavical conflicts between Europeans came to an end for a better future. So it's a breaking point for that, in that sense. And what is the foundation that was the beginning of the European Union, and still we can see that if we visit the Parliamentarium in Brussels or other places all around Europe, where Europe displays sort of its foundation myth and the legitimation and its culture is the ethical lesson for World War II. So overcoming the traumatic past to promise a better future, and that's what the EU is meant for. And that's how the EU is portrayed as a victory over history, where there is a no continuation, so a breakup with colonization, a breakup with conflicts, but a new organism. And this is also explained and transmitted from a legal point of view to the fact that, and I think all the process, according to me, and to an interdisciplinary approach, they goes in parallel, because on the same time, while the EU was building its own legitimation and narrative on the lesson of the Second World War and a new organism, the EU was also on the legal sphere proclaiming itself to be a different type of organization. So that goes all together, I think, saying that the EU is a different type of regional organization or international organization, so differentiated also from the classical legal aspect of international law. And then going back to the memory, so Europe of Peace is a product of memory work. So in the end of the day is that, because then what the first policies, and this is reflect on the policies, I mean, that goes together, intertwined. The European communities in the beginning, so in the 50s, from the Treaty of Rome, so on until the 90s, the main policies and the main elements where they worked mostly on was cohesion, was stability and peace. So cohesion of the internal population, the regions, to create the level playing field, internal market. So to put, according to the most classical EU integration theories, to create this condition that de facto will never bring the Europeans to fight for resources and on the same territories. And of course, when they started to create these memories of the Second World War, that was kind of not formal, but it became more formal in the 90s, especially after the Cold War, and with the commemoration of the Holocaust framework, what the doctrine always says. So the foundation of the EU as a never again started to be, let's say, formalized with the certain non-legislative act in the 90s through this Holocaust memory framework, that it became a transnational commemoration through all what was before the European communities, and then we can see in the legislative product of the EU institution, especially the main role has been played by the European Parliament, especially after the European Parliament became a directive elected supranational organism that already adopted in 93-95 this anti-discrimination resolution, not legislative binding acts, but that can influence the matter. And so on this, let's say, Western-built Holocaust theoretical framework, then we had the big bang enlargement, as is mostly defined by the doctrine. So all the Eastern post-socialist countries joined the EU. And then what happened is two elements that, on the one hand, the new elite or the new governments were, of course, in fracture with the communist past, and they all had what was described by the doctrine, the literature, an anti-communist agenda that had to build, and this was reflected in the building of resistant museums, anti-communist museums, monuments, of course, that went back to the nation and went back to other type of narrative and construction that look at more the ethnical aspect of each and any Eastern post-socialist country. And then, of course, that brought to the challenging of the exclusiveness of the Holocaust as, let's say, legitimation event. And that was, so you had in the 90s, and then especially in 2004 afterwards, the fact that the Eastern European countries brought the crimes committed by the Soviet Union and the communist regime in at the same level of the Holocaust, and so that the European, this was reflected in the big debates in the European Parliament, and that's what the doctrine say, that the European Parliament and the other European institution adopted a so-called EU memory framework, so a lot of soft law acts, so not binding act, that nonetheless influenced the European Union commemoration days, and especially in the EU enlargement policy. So for the new countries that they had to adapt to also this new narrative to become or be part of the European family. And so the memory became a right and a transitional justice as a compensative measure for those, especially after 2004, after the Soviet Union. And that, of course, been reflected in the new EU enlargement policy, neighboring policy, and the main instruments that we can see was the Solana-Pattern Letter, where they talk about the EU shared and common values to the people of Europe. So everyone should adopt these EU shared and common values, not only the EU member state citizen, but all the people of Europe. And that will be done by close cooperation through knowledge and culture. And then we have this very important shift that has been reflected in another soft law instrument, the European Parliament Resolution 2009, where that was one of the main important acts that see a united EU memory against any form of totalitarianism. So putting together the Holocaust, for instance, and the Holodomor and the crimes committed by the communist and the Nazi at the same time. So the case that I apply here, so to this framework, is the case of Srebrenica. I hope I say it correctly, and that goes within the European integration. Because, and that goes, and I apply this framework, the Holocaust framework, also to that, because what this case of Srebrenica was the fact that it's becoming now, as we will see in the documents soon, the case of, so that these people and the people of the Balkans should be part of the European family, and Srebrenica is the case of the reconciliation, the good neighborly relation and cooperation, of course, with the International Court for former Yugoslavia. And then what the framework here is dealing with the past remains a formal informal condition for EU membership. And in this case, I analyzed the most prominent resolution, so still soft law act by the European Parliament. So what is called like the EU legal reconciliation of Srebrenica, that made Srebrenica a part of common European, let's say, trauma, and then applying the Holocaust framework to that. And then, as you can see, what Srebrenica is completely fitting in the European integration process, whereas the EU is built on a peaceful, and that is reflected in these documents, whereas the EU is built on a peaceful coexistence, committed cooperation between its members, whereas one of the main motivations for European integration process is the will to prevent the recurrence of wars and crimes against international humanitarian law in Europe. It's a EU committed to a European perspective, and then plus stressed the importance of reconciliation as part of European integration process. So this is the words that they are used, that they are reflected also in the 2009 European Parliament resolution. And this is just some important words. This is the last slide that for instance, the von der Leyen Commission, so the last one, as stated with regard to Srebrenica, depicting as part of the European integration as a common path, so using the common Holocaust framework. For instance, Europe has not forgotten the same responsibility to prevent and stop. Europe failed, and then it remains an open wound and a shared responsibility stability and sovereignty forever, and that is part of the Dask, part of European history. So it's part of our history, or the European Council said that this atrocity that never happen again, will never happen again, and the same like the Holocaust or other atrocities from the communist part, and you can see that the common future for all Europeans, and again, all these institutions provide that. As a conclusion remarks, then we can see how the European is, let's say, Europeanizing Western Balkans memories in their speeches, and this is done by the common EU path, the peace, the Holocaust framework, and the common responsibility. And then further research, of course, would be needed in case we want to influence the EU legal framework of Srebrenica and other events in the Western Balkan memory policy. And that requires a bit more research. Thank you for that. I'm open for any request and yeah, sharing and question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Spera. We have time for short comment, and Natasha, you asked for the first comment, and then we have Professor Nikola Latkovic for the second, and then we should go further to the next session. Natasha.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for this session. Thank you, Francesco, Sinisa, Haykuhi. It was really, really amazing to hear you all. Unfortunately, the know-how from this conference, Balsa, I think you agree with me, is the sessions needs to be longer, because this time that we decide to have our something, it's not enough. So what I would like to comment, I can give a small comment and then ask maybe Haykuhi to give a word, Haykuhi, for a minute or two. That this session that we had now and the previous session really covered from different perspectives and from different angles all this, at least unwrap, at least just mentioned, but at least we are talking and mentioning all these influences that we were having in this part of the world, and depending on what era we are, or in which century we are, or depending on where the power is, the influences are different, but they are always here. So thank you for such an interesting session. Haykuhi, I would like to ask you about these houses of culture that you were renovating and reconstructing in Armenia lately, and that you're saying it's actually the same, they have the same concept. So my question is there a lack of ideas what can be done with them, or is lack of interest, or is there any, or you cannot come up with anything better than Soviets, or what's happening?
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much for this question, Natasha. Actually, my very big part of my PhD thesis that I defended in 2021 is devoted to these houses of culture. What happened, how actually this recycling of Soviet typical culture institutions, what happened with them. And houses of culture actually have very different models of recycling. And one of these, like, in the villages, sometimes they become, in Armenia it's called Urakhutian and Takhutian Taner, like the houses of happiness and sadness. So in villages, when they don't have restaurants or places where to commemorate someone who are dead, these houses of culture became these kind of places. In another case, I saw that they recycled into religious institutions. For example, the church bought these kind of houses of culture and recycled it as a religious institutions. But for those parts who just remained, and they are just a kind of abandoned by the state and by the community as well, and they don't have this finance and the support of Soviet authorities which they have before in Soviet time, and now they are a kind of abandoned places. They started started to reconstruct, but without any conceptualization. They, again, in several cases, I saw they opened a group of singing, dancing, or painting for the young people for the villages, especially for the villages. So in general, these houses of culture, they reflect the post-Soviet ruins, the ruins of Soviet collapse. They kind of a gap between the Soviet and post-Soviet period. And this is very interesting topic. I mean, I cannot answer in only 1-2 minutes. I tried to show you the directions, but the most important here that it's not only the case of Armenia. We see in post-Soviet a lot of countries when these houses of culture which regulated during the Soviet period and have this idea of propaganda, Soviet propaganda, they lose this, but they also didn't reframe into other organization. So somehow they are forgotten by the government and by the community. And that's why they became like places, for example, we can compare with the factories as well, with abandoned places, abandoned Soviet memories. And this is very interesting, like Francesco spoke about the memory policy. This is also very interesting to connect how actually these memories, collective memory and collective narrative of Soviet period are constructing. And on the base of this memory policy, sometimes we see these institutions, how they worked, how what kind of memories do they construct. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that's what people do in general. When they don't know how to reconstruct or how to put something from the previous time into new era, they just forget about it and they pretend it doesn't exist. So it's not only in Armenia, it's all over. So who is next? Thank you, Nicola.
We have one more time for one more question, and it comes from Professor Nikola Latkovic.
Hello to everyone. Thank you for great topics that are very interesting. I'm, as a professor of graphic design and typography, I'm very into the topic of that was introduced by Mr. Stefanovic. So I would like to pose a question. So I would like to ask if you could propose possible solutions for the situation in Serbian or other South Slavic languages that are using phonetic orthography, regardless which alphabet is being used.
No, well, there is first we have to find out what exactly we want. What exactly do we want? Particularly in Serbia, in Montenegro too. In Montenegro, as far as I know, you still have this 1974 constitutional solution of the two letters for the language, Serbian, Montenegrin, whatever. That's not a case I'm thinking about even. That's your problem, not mine. But you see, what is from the point of typography, back then, when when they were organizing the newspaper weekly, NIN, they could not find simply letters Cyrillic enough. So they had to make new ones. In Belgrade, there were none. So they had to make new ones on a type that they found in London. So that's a problem from topographical point of view, right? We do not have, in fact, state which is investing in typography and our typographic solutions. So when I used to interview the people from the printing industry, these book people and books industry people, and they said, we cannot make a good book for kids because we have to pay somebody always just to make this kind of modification into Russian or Bulgarian solutions because we have none in typography. So our typography, regardless that we have very strong school, and I've read about it and I know what is going on, but you know, we didn't have like Bulgarians had. They invested for 10 or 15 years, like many $1 million into the typography from the very beginning of digitalization. I don't know what do they do in Croatia. I really don't know. I'm not a typographist, but I know that in Serbia and in Montenegro, of course, nobody is investing in that. And that is one of the problems because that I've forgotten to say, because understanding here is that of Vuk Karadžić, or those who are promoting that kind of idea, is that letters are following the language, and that's not true. Letters are part of a fine arts, right? Calligraphy is part of it. Letters are not that. Letters are going with the state, not with the language.
We have a next session when we are talking about typography, I guess, right?
Yes, so we are coming into it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, participants, to all of you. So we actually crossed the time, so we have